All right, welcome, welcome. If you are new here, I'm so glad you came to join us. I hope you find it to be a really good use of your time this morning or afternoon, wherever you're at. Um, if you've been here before, welcome back. We're always glad to see friendly faces coming back. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more topics on legal technology talk. So last week, Beth talked about in part one of a new culture, cultivating a thriving environment for process improvement. And she's going to expound on that today in part two of cultivating a culture of continuous improvement. And then make sure to come back in 2 weeks for the final and part three, sustain the progress. So, Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. So, yeah, today we're going to talk about the culture and the culture of a firm and that culture as a foundation for growth. Because you can have the best environment and the best tools and the best tech and all of that stuff, and your improvement plant still won't grow. It needs a culture around it to do that. So, cultivation of a culture goes beyond just the establishment. It's continuing to encourage that growth by ensuring that your culture is conducive to growth, learning, and ongoing development, because that is your goal, is to continuously improve. So back to our plant analogy. Plants also need a culture around them to ensure the environment stays conducive to growth. Consistent watering schedule is necessary to keep growth consistent. Not watering for 3 weeks and then drowning the plant isn't going to have very good results. Um, a good regular feeding schedule is also just as important, along with the correct food for the plant, because they all take different foods. Um, light exposure also needs adjusted, especially like for indoor plants. Some of my plants need to be moved around at different times of the year because the sun comes through the window differently, and some of them don't like the sun, and some of them thrive on the sun. So that is all comes into play with that as well. And you also need to plan for absences to maintain that culture that the plants need to grow when you're not there. So all of that goes into all of the culture around maintaining and helping everything grow. So how do we create and foster a growth-oriented culture? Well, there's several ways. Prioritize innovation, collaboration, excellence. And this is made possible by strong leadership, support, open communication, and also by empowering employees. We're going to dive into that a little bit. So, what's the role of leadership in this? Well, they have several roles. One is setting a clear vision, providing guidelines of what our overall goals are, knowing where you want to be and where you want to get to in those goals by timeframes. Knowing what your overall goals are and how much do you need of every part just to meet those goals. Having established improvement goals, it helps to guide everyone in the improvements. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on this in something that we did. You know that I work for a manufacturing plant and we implemented lean processes there. So one of the things we did is one of our big products was going to, well, we just weren't sure we were going to get the sale on that for the next couple of years for contract. We were being outbid um, by foreign companies. And we actually took that information, all of that information, and laid it out for all the employees and said, look, here's where we're at. It cost us this much to make this product right now. In order to beat our competition, it needs to be down to this much. And we're not cutting your salaries. So, how are we getting there? And being able to set that clear goal and that clear vision and lay that out there for everyone, Were people nervous about that? Oh, yeah, yeah, they were. Um, but they did have a clear vision of it, and they appreciated knowing that instead of just saying, oh, we have to fix this and thinking that profit was going to go to the bottom line, when actually that profit was not going to be a profit. And we wouldn't survive unless we did that. But being able to set that clear vision and say, here's what it is, here's what we need, here's where we need to go, very strongly impacted the response back in getting those improvements put in place. And then once we have those goals, we need to establish expectations of the team. You don't need heroes. You may find yourself with some heroes, but you don't need everyone to be a hero. So let me explain that. We tend to look at those who buck the system and culture and make breakthroughs as heroes, and they are. So let's look at Benjamin Franklin. Many people thought he was crazy to go out there in the storm. I imagine there were a lot laughing at him behind his back, but he did it anyway. That's hero behavior. That's ignoring the masses and pressing on. You don't need someone to invent something masterful. If you get that, it's a bonus. You need an empowered team to build your improvement machine. Most developments currently are in the work of teams. If you want to build a rocket, you don't hire one person. You hire a team of people that are great at their respective specialties. And that is what you want in your team as well. A team that's great in what they do, empowered to present ideas and hold each other accountable and engage in the process. It doesn't need to be a hero that stands out above everyone else. You need a collective team to do that. And I also need a voice that cooperates for more than 5 minutes. Okay. And leaders should also be active participants in the initiatives, providing resources, support, and guidance to the team. It builds a respect for you and it fosters that great communication. Nobody should feel like they're being checked up on when you're asked about progress. It should feel like a check-in. And what can I do to help you out in this? Not, you know, what are you doing? That kind of thing. And that goes into servant leadership. And servant leadership is the idea that to be a powerful leader, you are serving those beneath you. And that whole idea is a whole nother topic that I'm not gonna like jump into today, but that keep that in mind of servant leadership, and that is a great um, area to explore to improve your leadership capabilities. So the two most important things that leadership can provide to all of this are encouraging the identification of improvements and supporting the implementation of those ideas. You want the feedback from the staff. You want to know what's their pain points and any ideas to fix it. You want to be part of those conversations and you want to support them in providing resources and training and opportunities for collaboration. This does not mean when somebody says, oh, we need a new, if we had a different printer, we could go out and do all this, and you rush out that day and buy a printer. That's not necessarily what that means. That means that they, first of all, feel comfortable enough to come tell you about a printer issue, and that knowing you will support them and get them the resources and training and opportunities for that collaboration. It empowers the team and it builds this powerhouse of ideas and motion onward towards growth. And that's what you're trying to build. In our culture, we also need open communication and collaboration. Um, and what is all of that? Well, being open about what each part does helps build the trust where we can help each other. Your job isn't a super secret operation. You should feel free to share things about how you work to help find those improvements. Holding things close to the vest and guarding them from everything doesn't get you help when you may need those helps. And it also enhances cross-functional collaboration. It leads to that cross-functional teamwork. Having someone able to step in and help out does not and should not diminish your role. Having someone be able to help you out or step in if you're out relieves a great deal of stress on your day and your day-to-day participation. Everyone has strengths. Sometimes it's that one person is better with dealing with certain personalities than another person. When John and I worked in the law firm, I am not a CSC person. I am not the person to have those conversations with people. However, there was one client that just did not, I'm not going to say he didn't like John, but there was just a personality clash. It was terrible. So every time John would go, "Here, Beth, you need to call him." Like, okay. That was not my role. That was not what I was good at. However, in this particular situation, it was better for him to talk to me than to John. Um, and that's just what it was. And that was that cross-functional collaboration where we had that culture where John knew he could come in and say, "Hey, can you call this person because, I'm not comfortable making this call to them and we clash and everything else." And knowing that I'm not going to go, "No, that's not my job." you know, that's your job. Go call them. I may have said that in joking a couple times, but that is not actually what happened. And I did make those calls because that's the environment, and that was the whole culture that we had established in there, was being able to have that cross-functional collaboration to get something done. And all of that empowers employee engagement. It builds employee participation, which leads to more motivation and higher job satisfaction. I am sure we've all been in a job where we felt it was a thankless position. You just stay in your lane and keep your nose to the grindstone. And your satisfaction was very low, and you dreaded going to work, and you went home unfulfilled every day. That's not the culture that fosters improvement at all. And back to the whole manufacturing thing, there was a different feeling on the floor once we built out that employee engagement and empowered employees. There was just a different feeling when you walked out there. Um, and it wasn't, uh, part of it was that being in manufacturing, everybody felt that they had to have their nose to the grindstone, so to speak, and be in their lane doing their thing, and there was no room for anything else. And after there, everyone realized that there is actual engagement with that. And if somebody comes out, if one of the higher ups, so to speak, would walk out onto the floor and walk up to somebody doing the job, they were not just focused on them focusing on what they're doing and ignoring them. That was the culture before. But the culture then was, let's have a conversation about what you're doing and explain to me. And they felt free doing that. Where before, they felt they would get in trouble if they did that. So that is one little example of how that culture changes, and the actual feel of everything in the area tends to feel a little bit different. So what are the benefits of all this in, everything we do? Being able to have the diverse perspectives, a fresh pair of eyes. Everyone sees things differently, and sometimes things just jump out at them. So, here's an example of one of the things that we ran into. We had, for some reason, I'm stuck back in my manufacturing thing today, but I'll, 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 it's very relative. So we had cutter set up. So we had three pieces that made a cutter that cut things. And in between those pieces, there would be shims, but they're little pieces that held them apart and made them perfect for what they needed to do. For a long time, when those needed sharpened, they would take them out of the middle and send it back. Well, when you got it back, then you had to start from scratch to set it up. Um, in one of the improvement exercises we went through, and somebody asked the question, why are we doing that? Like, and the people in the sharpening room went, well, we can keep them in there. And we cut down like 20 minutes out of setups just because nobody ever asked, could we keep him in there? And nobody even thought to ask because that was just the process until somebody from a completely different department doing a completely different job went, well, that's silly. Like, so it is the perspective. It never crossed anybody's mind. And so those fresh eyes in there really help to set up that enhanced problem solving because they come up with different ideas. They see things differently. And you can really improve your problem solving when you add those fresh eyes in there. And then the innovation through collaboration, because sometimes it isn't the fresh pair of eyes that come up with the idea. Sometimes it's the influence, or they say one thing and it sparks an idea. And if some of you have had meetings with me, you have actually seen that happen, where we'll be in the middle talking about something and I'll go, oh, I think that, and it may be completely unrelated to what we're discussing, or it may be a completely different thought that somebody said something and it sparked an idea and an option for improvement in there. It happens to me all the time. I've also seen it happen to other people all the time. That is what a good collaboration and innovation through collaboration looks like. So some of you may have seen it and not even know that's what it is. All of this helps to build those stronger relationships between the teams, and it builds that culture of trust and support. It stops the division of us versus them. The scheduling department messes up my calendar all the time. Um, really? Like, um, stop that division. It's not them versus us. It is we are a team. We're a one big team, and let's figure out how to stop that messing up of your calendar as a team. So having a culture that encourages all that cross-function teamwork will just strengthen your team, but it doesn't mean you completely train everyone to all the jobs. It just adds flexibility to your team. Sometimes people take, cross-functional teamwork and they'll blow that completely out of proportion and go, everybody needs to be trained on every job. Ultimately, that may be the goal, but that's not your immediate goal. That is not what you need. For one, yeah, you can train other people on other jobs, and not a CSC. You can train me to be a CSC, but you can't train personality. So, it doesn't really matter how much you train me to do that. It's just not gonna work. So you really need to understand that cross-functional training doesn't mean that I can just flip people around and they'll be able to do that. It's building those strengths. But, if someone's out, could I step in and be a CSC for a day? Probably I could manage it. Um, but yeah, you don't want me in there all the time. So how do we foster all of that employee engagement and get people engaged in driving innovation and ownership? Um, so let's talk about ownership. And you may think, well, we just said to open up and share our processes, and now you want us to own it and take it back. No, ownership doesn't mean you block it off. It just means you're responsible for it. You have a responsibility to nourish its growth, take pride in it, accept the criticism of it, and also accept advice in his care. And be proud when it succeeds. You're part of the team. That is, when you own your part of the team, you are going to be invested in that. And that is going to be your baby, so to speak. And when you take ownership of it, when someone takes ownership of a part of a team and part of a process, um, they become very strong in knowing what that is, knowing how that affects other things. And that just drives more cross collaboration because this is my job. I know this, but I feed into this. And so I need to make sure it's good for them too. And that is what ownership really is about, and being able to um, own your role, not limit your ownership into this is just this little part, but actually the whole big picture of what you own. What does that do? Well, it boosts job satisfaction and retention. When employees feel they're heard and see progress in the ideas, it really helps with their empowerment. They're part of a team. Um, we talked about, the job where it's just come in, keep your nose to the grindstone, don't think outside the box. Those aren't very empowering to people, and they don't provide a lot of job satisfaction, and they lead to low retention rates. So being able to be empowered and be part of a team across everything and understand how you fit into the big wheel of your organization really does empower people and keep them engaged, and they want to stay with you. And sometimes it's adding training and resources to help the team grow. Empowerment includes providing those with training and resources to develop their skills. It's an investment in their growth, not only for them, but for the whole team and organization, and it enhances their capabilities. So your whole organization becomes more successful. So we always want to build skills and prepare our team for new challenges. If COVID taught us anything, it's that we need to be adaptable, adjusting quickly and smoothly to the changing environment. Teams that did that well weathered the storm successfully. Teams that didn't do that well, some of them are still struggling. That is just how that played out. But being able to adjust quickly and smoothly to anything out there that changes, and being able to pull a team together and say, okay, here's what's happening. How do we address it? Getting that team input really helped those teams that weathered that storm successfully. Um, and embracing change. So this is the hardest one. Your culture needs to embrace change. Everything we talked about so far makes that easier. It all feeds into that. But really, the hardest part of all of this is really getting people to embrace the change. When they feel supported and empowered, it makes the acceptance of change so much easier. The issue that most people have with change is that it's out of their control, and that's what they start to see. But when you empower people and they become the change, now the change is in their control. Even if they have a small part of that change, they feel heard and empowered and supported in that, then that change becomes a good thing for them. When you have top-down directives of we're going to change this, what is unsaid behind, but what employees hear is whether you like it or not. And that is not, when you do that, when they hear that, it's an instant hands up, not going to do that. Um, and even though they may not say that outwardly, inside, that's what happened. So really bringing them into the change and bringing them into that whole process, that builds your whole culture to where they're supported in navigating that change. They're part of it, and they can put positivity behind it. Now, we pull in data-driven decision making, really being able to use data, and that also helps people accept those changes. So having access to accurate and timely data is crucial in making informed decisions. Having a reporting system that can guide the team focus, it simplifies the decision of what's important. One of the best things that we did was actually put two TVs in the break room, and we added a report that was updated daily with all the statistics and put it up there, and throughput and productivity and all of that stuff. So that was out in front of everybody every day, and they saw it. If they wanted to look at it and see, what we were doing, honestly, it came to the point where the first break of the day was at 10 a.m. And if I didn't have, because I was updating it, if I didn't have it updated at 10 a.m., I had somebody walking down the hall to my office going, "Hey, it's not updated." Like, and these were people off the floor that previously didn't know, didn't care, didn't talk about what was going on in the whole of a company. And now it became very important because they owned it. They were part of those changes. They were part of those improvements. This was theirs. And when they owned it, they really wanted to see that data. So, and part of that was being able to go, here's the data, and then they're like, oh, that's important. And now that became very important to them. So that is also a big part of it. That reporting should be able to be used to identify opportunities. It allows you to analyze trends and patterns and educate each other on the processes and how to improve. When you look at something and say, oh, here we can identify that this is an issue, and then you can talk to everyone surrounding that and others, because we want those fresh eyes in there, and say, how can we improve this? It really leads to that whole um, culture in your organization of being able to improve. So the reporting has two roles. We're uncovering areas for improvement and we're measuring the impact of the changes. So when we find the areas to improve, we're going to go ahead and improve those. And then we need to make sure that we're measuring that impact so we see how that's on going forward. Your reporting needs to do both in order to be effective in supporting your improvements. So we want to build a supportive policies for improvements. Improvements should be a part of everyday life. It should not be a goal once and done. That is not what improvements are. They are continuous. So we always want to recognize improvements as well. And this is just as important. We want to acknowledge achievements. Individual and team achievements. Reinforce that positive behavior, take that recognition, whatever that is. Um, Make sure it's out there and that you are acknowledging improvements towards goals and things like that. Some teams implement reward systems um, and incentives to demonstrate, yes, we want your contribution to this improvement, and we're going to acknowledge that by a reward system. And you always celebrate small wins. It doesn't matter what it is. If there is improvement in one of your areas, if you haven't met your goals, but you've improved, celebrate that. Yeah, you may be disappointed that you didn't get there, but it doesn't matter because you really need to celebrate all of those little things to keep that culture moving in the right direction. And then we need to learn from failures and successes. Failures are just another way to learn. Not everything is successful, but everything has the ability to teach you something. It is a teaching tool. So you want to analyze the failures, not just throw up your hands in defeat and say, well, that didn't work. Why didn't it work? Let's go in and see why it didn't work. Did parts of it work? The parts that didn't work, what do we need to do to correct that? You just don't throw up your hands and say, yep, didn't work, and walk away from it. On the other hand, you also don't do that with success. You want to celebrate your success. You don't go, yep, that worked, we're done, and walk away. No, because order will eventually return to chaos if it's not maintained. So we want to continue maintaining that. So you need to use the insights from both to continue your forward motion in that. And that comes into commitment to the culture of improvement and open communication, because that all brings its own rewards. Um, Being able to have that team environment when you go into a team meeting and somebody says, we're really busy today, so we're not going to talk about our improvements. The team goes, whoa, no, 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 that's not acceptable. That is an important part of this. We absolutely need to talk about that. That is the type of culture that you need to have where when you're talking about your improvements and your things going forward, that the team understands and they own it. They own that this is our process. This is the forward motion we're getting, and we have a commitment to that. And that comes from everybody, and that comes from building that team and having that strong team that will defend that culture. And that's one of those practical applications. Stronger teams, better member satisfaction, improved client experience, a better bottom line, lower stress for everyone, and the ability to adapt, and thrive in competitive and changing landscapes are the successes that come out of having that culture that supports process improvement. Having all of those teams come together and being able to understand that you're constantly moving forward and you have goals to reach and you're going to have goals after that, and this is going to continue to grow, and we're only looking to get better. We're not looking to do something, stop, and just go, okay, we're good for now. And wait until 3 years down the road when you figure out that the rest of the world has passed you by, and now you may as well just be back to writing everything with a quill and paper, because that's how far the world's moved. So we want to actually have that culture where it keeps up with everything and keeps you moving forward. John, do you have any things? And I'm sure you do.
I think you need to change that to John. What are your thoughts? So I do. Um, you had talked about TVs in break rooms that you did.
Mhm.
Law firms are doing that as well.
Yep.
And some are putting reporting, some are putting goals up for quick KPI review, where we're at, where we need to go, brainstorming idea board. We have law firms that we work with that are actually doing that. So that's not just kind of an out of the box example. Firms
Right.
are doing this, or they're grabbing a chart, like those old paper charts. And just if you have
Mhm.
an idea, just go write it on there. And then you have it at your stakeholder meeting or whatever you do. A recurring theme that I kind of heard through this was not everyone needs to know everything, just everything about their own role. So, Beth, I want you,
Yep.
if you will, to beat a dead horse for me right here, live on Zoom. When developing a process, and in tandem with empowering employee engagement, why does each department need to be represented in that conversation based on creating this culture?
2 words: unintended consequences. Because you do not know, you may think you do, but you don't necessarily know the ripple effect down the line. Um, and um, a lot of that comes from not being the cross information, the cross of information across teams, and the cross training and all of that. Um, so not knowing the effect that you have on someone else, where you may change one little part of your process, but it greatly affects someone else. And I'm trying to like grab an example of that. Um, so one of the things is, and let's go back to the workshops and meetings after a workshop. Um, when we were doing, John was doing the workshops and I was doing the meeting after a workshop, we would meet all of the time to go over things, questions that people were coming in that we could include in the workshop and improve that. That was a constant process improvement for us. It wasn't the workshop's done. There we go. No, it wasn't because it constantly needed to be improved. People were coming up with other questions. Sometimes questions weren't getting answered, whatever else. If John had sat down with that workshop and goes, this isn't very important, I'm going to take this out. Now, give it a couple weeks. Beth's going to come back and go, why is everybody asking about this? Because you took it out, didn't think it was important, but actually it is something that's important to people. And so being able to have that feedback back and forth, being able to have that communication and knowing what each other's role is and what's going on with each other is important to know that if you make a little change, what is that unintended consequence down the line? Because now Beth is going over and reteaching this 15 minutes of the workshop because we cut it out because we didn't think it was important. Like that is an effect that just ripples and continues to add and roll down the road.
I love that. That is an excellent example. I think we started doing it once a week, and once we honed it in, we were doing it about once a month.
Yep.
And then you would just have the list of recurring questions, and we would just adapt that into the workshop to reduce those questions to make the consultations more streamlined and productive for the client and for the firm.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
in the chat, I put Fix My Boss by Molly McGrath and where you can buy it.
Hmm.
Because you were talking about servant leadership and strong leadership within the team. And I just wrote a little blurb of how this really ties into that, of why you really should read that book if you haven't yet. We talk a lot about it, but this is a really great example of why this book is so important. Um, it empowers employee engagement in law firms because it promotes clear roles, open communication, and shared accountability. It helps the leaders of the firm and the team create a culture of trust and ownership, leading to a more motivated and collaborative and happy team. Clear roles so you know who to turn to with questions and what you need to do in your own role. That book really details how to do that. And I know we always talk about these crucial conversations and whatnot, and
Hmm.
that really is a huge theme in that book. But there is so much depth to it that really integrates with what we talked about today. Um, and I would get your highlighter out when you do it. It's just got really good material. So I encourage you to go get that book. Um, the next one is good collaboration that you talked about. It reminds me
Hmm.
of last week when you said that no idea is a bad idea, and to always open the table for any idea and not to dismiss anyone. If you weren't here last week, we talked about Michelin tires, and how Michelin stars for restaurants develop from a tire company. If you weren't here from that, it's really impactful of how crazy out of the box ideas turn into something amazing. Um, just type a few words into Chat GPT and it'll tell you that story. And it'll really stick with you because you see Michelin everywhere, and you're just going to see how no idea is too crazy. You can't train someone's personality,
Nope.
like Beth talked about. And we always say when you're hiring, m much of the time you can train skills, but you can't train a personality. And that is huge with client services. Um, but a person can be adaptable for a role to help out and fill in on a temporary basis. And that's getting to know each other, knowing each other's personalities, things like that. Where Beth, she's very direct, very to the point. But I hear her talk to, when we were in the law firm talking to clients, and I'm like, who is this? Because she can adapt. It wasn't fake. It was correct information. It's just she knew how to adapt as well. Um, and client services, this is really important, is being adaptable in your own role because you are almost like a transformer. You have a happy client, so you're going to go with that. You're going to kind of match that energy. If you have somebody screaming at you, you need to adapt and learn how to de escalate and possibly just be more firm in directing the conversation back to how your process works. So that's why a lot of the team always thinks client service coordinators are the wacky ones, but it's because of their role that that's really what their role is to be. Knowing your role means you know who to talk to make successful changes and who it might affect. And that's what Beth just talked about. Ownership doesn't mean you do everything in your role. It just means that you know your role enough to know how to work with a team on it. And then just an example that kind of popped into my head, and it's very, very kindergarten, but it's an image we can all picture, is you're just a cog. And I'm going to say this as a demeaning way and then as an empowering way. The demeaning way is you're just a cog in the law firm machine. That's it. You're nothing more.
Yep.
But if your cog gets removed, the machine stops working. That's your empowerment. That's how important you are. Your one little cog will break an entire machine. All right, that's my thoughts, Beth.
That is very good. That is very good. Yep. And next week, we're going to talk about how to sustain all this and how to take this practical into the firm and what you can use to make sure that you keep continuing to improve.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to go into open coaching, but I am going to say while we're recording, I really do like the idea, and I've been thinking about it for a little bit, that on Wednesdays, and we'll start next Wednesday, whatever
Mhm.
you're putting in when you say you were here, the little form you fill out to let us know you were here, whatever you're saying you want to learn about, if it does not require an entire open coaching session, I'm going to start putting those in Wednesday newsletters and kind of detailing the pros, cons, effects, and really answering those questions. So on Wednesdays, start looking out for those. I'll call it something kind of creative so you can watch out for those. All right. And I might even get Beth to write one or two. We'll see. All right. I'm going to hit stop recording.